Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 4 waiver wire targets for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're talking about prospects at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, kicker, and defensive positions, giving you guys my perspective and opinions as to which of these players you can not only just pick up this week and potentially start in Week 4, but guys that are going to give you depth going into the weeks ahead. Now, of course, with the amount of injuries we have already faced thus far this season and the bye weeks that are to come, we have to make sure that our bench depth is at its all-time high because we're going to need to go ahead and throw many of these guys into our lineups, and we need a win between weeks 6 through 14 in order to ensure that we make the fantasy football playoffs in order to capture a 2021 fantasy football championship. So, of course, week by week, we're not going to overreact by performances, and we're going to go ahead and make sure that our bench depth and our lineup continues to improve every single chance we could possibly get. Now, before we begin today's content, I of course want to thank you guys for the incredible support. For those of you who have not yet already, subscribe to the channel. We're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 fantasy football season, whether it is waiver wire videos, rankings, must starts, hidden gems, of course, strength of schedule videos to come, trade targets, all of that here on the channel for those of you who are interested. I do appreciate you guys continuing the support, coming out with your viewership. Thank you very much in advance. Now, before we begin today's content and begin with the running back position, I wanted to go ahead and talk about week 3 because I know many of you are going to talk about it, and I need to go ahead and address it because my must starts of this last week were absolutely horrendous. Tyson Williams was a no-show. I mean, I thought that the Baltimore Ravens against the Detroit Lions was a good matchup, especially considering the Ravens were, one of the top rushing teams in the National Football League. Obviously, that was a big miss. And trust me, guys, you don't need to tell me that was a big miss. The person that, of course, gets the angriest at me, trust me, isn't you, it's me. I'm the one who takes it upon myself to try to improve every single week. And though I missed, I can assure you, I'm going to improve. And it's very seldom that you'll find a situation in which a running back has all things going for them and then they'll just flub on that given week. But either way, I take it on the chin. I take responsibility for that. If you went ahead and lost, that's on me, and I apologize if, in fact, you had another player that would have ended up giving you the victory. But either way, besides just Tyson Williams, Sterling Shepard, hamstring injury, brutal. James White, hip injury, may even be season ending based on how bad of an injury it was. It was it's a hip injury similar to Tua and Ryan Fitzpatrick. So, best wishes to James White. Claypool was fine. I mean, another injury. You ready for this? Claypool, was hobbling throughout that game, but Juju got hurt as well in that contest. I mean, the amount of injuries are unbelievable. And Trey Sermon got lucky and got saved by a touchdown. And I now understand why Kyle Shanahan didn't want to play him, because at times he doesn't look great. He's not hitting holes as hard as he potentially should. Regardless, either way, I take it upon myself. I take the responsibility for that. But, if I could see the future, I certainly would try to make all the best calls. Either way, we're going to improve from it. My apologies in advance. And let's go ahead. And now let's get into trying to improve our lineups for week 4 to set us up for some success in the future. Let's go ahead and begin by talking about the running back position, beginning with Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. Now, like I've mentioned already on this episode, injuries are taking place left, right, and center. And if it wasn't already a wake-up call to have your respective blue-chip running backs handcuffed based on what happened the week prior, of course, we all went after Tony Pollard, right? So in that given week when we were all running for potential handcuffs, we had to make sure that we all had our handcuffs, right? So whoever was a Dalvin Cook manager, you had Alexander Madison. Whoever was a Christian McCaffrey manager, have Chuba Hubbard. But unfortunately, there are many of you Christian McCaffrey managers that do not have Chuba Hubbard on roster. And that is unbelievable to me because we know about his injury history and we know that there was a potential. Either way, from what we've heard from Matt Rule, the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, Christian McCaffrey will probably only be out for 2 to 3 weeks, assuming there's no other complications. For 2 to 3 weeks, having the starting running back of the Carolina Panthers is very beneficial. I mean, he's currently only rostered in 35% of leagues, which of course means that he's widely available. He ran the ball 11 times for 52 yards, had himself 5 targets, 3 receptions for 27 yards, and 9.4 total fantasy points. This upcoming week, in week 4, takes on the Dallas Cowboys. Now, we don't know how the Dallas Cowboys Monday night game has gone because I'm recording this before then, but just kind of giving you some perspective. Of course, there is going to be a lot of opportunity going to the running back position. There's a reason that Mike Davis last season, in the absence of Christian McCaffrey, was able to finish as the number 15 overall running back. So if in fact you have the ability to go after and get Chuba Hubbard, I would absolutely suggest doing so, because not only is he going to be a starter for the next couple weeks, but if in fact something else is to complicate the situation of Christian McCaffrey's hamstring, that you could have the starting running back for the Carolina Panthers, which has already shown to have a lot of value, especially in PPR formats for the weeks ahead. Another thing that I wanted to mention before we move on from Chuba Hubbard is Royce Freeman. I know Royce Freeman, of course, many of you know, a former Oregon running back, played for the Denver Broncos, but was released earlier this offseason. He landed with the Carolina Panthers, and he would be the second string running back behind Hubbard. So if in fact you're interested in maybe having, some shares of him, that's fine. But I certainly do believe that Hubbard is going to be leading this backfield, barring no setbacks from him. And that is why he is our number one running back waiver wire pickup on the week. We'll move on to Zack Moss as our number two. Like I mentioned earlier, I typically don't like to talk about players that are owned in majority of leagues. But as of this current moment in time, Zack Moss is only rostered in 54% of leagues, which gives me a little bit of semblance of maybe confidence that maybe some of your leagues he's available. If in fact he is, he's coming off of week 2 in which he had 2 rushing touchdowns, and week 3 in which he had 13 attempts, 60 rushing yards, 3 catches on 3 targets for 31 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. That's 16.6 fantasy points. This upcoming week, they take on the Houston Texans. It is extremely advantageous for you to potentially have Zack Moss on roster, because not only is he going to benefit from the garbage time, he may even score once again this upcoming week. So just putting it out there for those of you who already have him rostered, go ahead and keep him. But for the coming weeks, for those of you who do not have Zack Moss, this Buffalo Bills offense is one of the best in the league. And when they take these massive leads, they run the clock out, and they certainly give a lot of opportunity to Zack Moss in those scenarios. So again, just giving you a reminder, Zack Moss, if he's available, go ahead and get after him. Moving on to our number 3 option, we have Peyton Barber. My goodness, Peyton Barber running 13 times for like 31 yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers wasn't very exciting, but the Miami Dolphins cannot stop the run. Another great matchup when we all thought Kenyon Drake was going to be the biggest factor of that offense. Now, don't get me wrong. Kenyon Drake was 1 inch away from scoring a touchdown on that reception that he took to the goal line. Now, of course, Peyton Barber comes in and takes that touchdown, not mere, snaps later, but it's okay. Peyton Barber had himself an incredible game nonetheless, and with Josh Jacobs continuing to miss games, I think that there's a potential where, of course, Peyton Barber could have more and more value as we progress. 23 rushing attempts, 111 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 5 targets leading to 3 receptions, and 31 receiving yards. Of all the running backs, I didn't expect Peyton Barber to get PPR work either way. 21.7 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. That's career highs in fantasy points in a half PPR and career highs in rushing yards for Peyton Barber throughout his career. With Josh Jacobs missing time with his ankle and toe injury, of course, I think this is a potential automatic pickup for those of you who are in need of running back depth. This upcoming week, the Raiders take on the Los Angeles Chargers. It is an extremely beneficial matchup considering we saw Pollard go for 100, Zeke go for 71 and a touchdown as well. We saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire come back to life this last week against that defense as well. Peyton Barber should be able to tear them up. Moving on to our final option at the running back position, we have Kenneth Gainwell. I wanted to go ahead and first and foremost talk about Kenneth Gainwell because he does play later tonight in the Monday Night Football game against the Dallas Cowboys. If you have someone on roster currently and there's someone that you already plan on dropping, whether it is a second defense, another kicker, another running back, or wide receiver that has not produced over the last couple weeks, I would suggest picking up Kenneth Gainwell before tonight's game, putting him on roster, and just in case, if he ends up producing or you have the potential handcuff of Miles Sanders, you could have more value in the coming week, and you don't even have to spend any waiver priority for him. So if in fact he's available, I would suggest you going after him. Now, for those of you who are wondering why I may not have already mentioned Alexander Mattison or Sony Michel, again, these guys are rostered in more than 65% of leagues, and they should be, right? They're handcuffs to pretty good, backfields overall. We, of course, saw Alexander Mattison have a monster week, which we anticipated because that's typically what he does when, of course, Dalvin Cook is out with an injury. Now, Sony Michel obviously didn't find as much success, but 20 rushing attempts is a boatload of opportunities, should already be rostered because, again, we knew there was a potential last week that Darrell Henderson was going to miss time, and if in fact he was, go after him. So for those of you who are wondering why I didn't mention guys like Madison, Michel, maybe even Cordero Patterson, it's because, again, they are rostered in majority of leagues as it currently stands in comparison to the guys I've mentioned today. Just putting that in perspective. We can go ahead and move on to the wide receiver position, and I want to go ahead and talk about Emmanuel Sanders. Of course, currently rostered at only 26% of leagues, came out with 6 targets, 5 receptions, 94 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns against the Washington football team. With 23.9 half PPR fantasy points, he just pretty much established himself as the for sure wide receiver 3 of this offense going forward. Now, besides, of course, Stephon Diggs getting himself his targets. That's always going to be the case. Cole Beasley had himself a monster game this last week in a full PPR scoring format. But it is exciting to see that we have the potential of going after Emmanuel Sanders, who is going to be a big part of this offense. Now that he's beaten out Gabriel Davis, we have a solidified member of an offense that is scoring a boatload of points week over week. Considering amongst all teams in the National Football League, they throw the ball a very high percentage. Last season, it was like in the 65% range. If they're going to continue to throw at that rate, of course, there's going to be a lot of value to be had, especially from an Emmanuel Sanders-esque player in a very vital offense in the National Football League. Don't mind at all. Even if, in fact, we end up seeing the potential of other players in this offense go down or miss time, Emmanuel Sanders even steps up and has an even greater role in this offense. I know he's only the wide receiver 3 at this point of this Bills offense, but it could end up expanding his role in the coming weeks if anything's to happen. So again, he's also an investment for the future with, of course, the craziness that is the NFL as it currently stands. But again, a great option going forward and plays against the Houston Texans this upcoming week. We move on to Hunter Renfrow of the Las Vegas Raiders. Hunter Renfrow has been incredible. Considering he's only being rostered in 11% of leagues as it currently stands, coming off of a week in which he had 5 receptions, 77 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown, 16.2 fantasy points, and a half PPR is incredible. But in a full PPR, he's an even better potential prospect because, again, the receptions are going to be there. He is a discount version of Cole Beasley, like we just mentioned in regards to, of course, Emmanuel Sanders next to him. But a budget version of Cole Beasley is a great option. I mean, in a half PPR, in the first 2 weeks of the season, Hunter Renfrow went for 10 points and 8.2 fantasy points. So, of course, he's been a solidified option as a wide receiver 3 play and potential flex play if, in fact, you need him. But in a full PPR, becomes that much more viable of a player. And in comparison to maybe even Emmanuel Sanders in a full PPR, the consistency has been there thus far this season, and the matchups are going to continue to benefit him considering how much of the targets from Derek Carr he's getting. Again, Derek Carr's performances as of the last couple weeks, 380 plus passing yards for 3 consecutive games and 2 touchdowns in each of those games, makes you think that this offense is going to continue to hum. And of course, Hunter Renfrow is certainly going to benefit from that going forward. We move on to Tim Patrick, another player that I've talked about for week over week, currently only rostered in 23% of leagues. The last 3 weeks of performance, 11.9, 11.2, 12.3 in a half PPR scoring format. Again, they've continued to look in his direction since Jerry Jeudy has been out. I know Courtland Sutton has been an extremely inconsistent part of this offense, but Tim Patrick in the receiving game consistently is seeing targets and finding a lot of productivity in doing so. So for those of you who are struggling with injuries at the wide receiver position or do not find a lot of consistency from your bench players and you need to go ahead and continue to grab guys that are going to give you more depth, Tim Patrick is that player for many of you going forward. I think, of course, this Baltimore Ravens matchup is a tougher one, but from what we just saw the Detroit Lions do and almost potentially beat them this past Sunday, they're not an impossible team to beat. And a 3-0 Denver Broncos team will have a lot to say about that in Mile High City. And I think there's going to be a lot of action for Tim Patrick in the coming weeks either way. Let's go ahead and move on to our final wide receiver option here. I'm suggesting Terrace Marshall once again. Terrace Marshall in the first 3 weeks of the season has seen 14 targets in comparison to Robbie Anderson's 11 targets. With Christian McCaffrey out, I do not expect Hubbard to see 9-10 targets a game. So I do expect Sam Darnold to have to air the ball out even more. And I think Terrace Marshall is going to take steps forward in the coming weeks and in the matchups that they have on hand to become the number 2 receiving option as in terms of the wide receiver in this respective offense. I think, of course, with Dan Arnold being traded earlier today, that does present a potential for Terrace Marshall to get even more targets in this respective offense. I think there's a lot of potential here. And the reason why I want to talk about him in comparison to other receivers is, of course, he's only rostered in 14% of leagues. You may be wondering, where is Christian Kirk, Jacoby Myers, Henry Ruggs, Cole Beasley, Cordero Patterson? These are players that are rostered in more than 55% of leagues at this current moment in time. So they're probably not available in many of your deeper leagues, whether you, specifically if you play in a 12-team league, for sure they're not available. And I want to go ahead and invest in a player. I want to get the Rondale Moore before he becomes Rondale Moore and a huge option in fantasy. I want to get to the receiving options that are going to be explosive in the second half of the season, similar to the way that a Justin Jefferson or a Claypool were last season. I think Terrace Marshall can be that guy. There's a reason why I've been talking about him for the entirety of this month and why I'm going to continue to, of course, suggest him as an option to kind of build depth and potential for your bench going forward. Let's go ahead and move on and let's begin talking about the tight end position. Tight end position is very tricky, but I wanted to go ahead and first and foremost talk about Mike Gesicki, because if in fact someone in your league dropped him, where there's a potential of that, again, because Mike Gesicki, though he has been a top 12 tight end in each of the last 2 seasons of fantasy football, 2019 and 2020, a lot of people do not trust him and do not want to wait for his potential breakout game. And unfortunately, for those of you who dropped him, you missed out on that. He had himself 12 targets, 10 receptions, 86 receiving yards with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. I think there's a lot of potential for Mike Gesicki going forward because, again, he and Jalen Waddle had themselves an incredible amount of targets. I think Waddle had himself 13. Mike Gesicki had himself 12. There's a lot of potential going forward for these prospects. Of course, with Tua going to the injured reserve, missing the next 2 weeks as well with that rib injury, Jacoby Brissett is going to be looking in the direction of Mike Gesicki. So again, if he is available and you are in need of a tight end, go ahead and invest and pick this guy up. Moving forward, we have Tyler Conklin of the Minnesota Vikings. Of course, with Irv Smith having the preseason injury, Tyler Conklin pretty much picked up majority of the work. Conklin is available in 96% of leagues. He's only rostered in 4% of leagues as of this current moment in time on Yahoo. He's coming off an incredible game of 8 targets, 7 receptions, 70 receiving yards, and a touchdown, 16.5 fantasy points. But with that being said, a lot of it had to do with the fact that, of course, we saw less of Osborne in the rotation of potential targets and receptions. We saw a lot more Conklin. Maybe it was a decision in terms of the matchup against the Seattle Seahawks defense. But either way, if he's going to see more exposure to targets like this in the coming weeks, he's going to find a lot of value because we know that the Minnesota Vikings offense has always used the tight end, going back to Kyle Rudolph, and of course recently with Irv Smith last season, the back end when Rudolph was out with an injury. And even in the games in which Irv Smith was getting his work, Tyler Conklin was still there and he was still scoring. If I'm not mistaken, in week 17 of last season, or week 16 or 17, he scored a touchdown. Someone can correct me on that. And he ended up getting himself a couple good games in terms of fantasy productivity. If he can continue to expand upon that this season, I think there's a lot of potential for him. The next tight end I want to talk about is Dawson Knox. Surprisingly so, this offense is so potent that it does not matter where you are. If you're a wide receiver, a running back, or a tight end, Josh Allen is going to find you, and he's going to give you the potential boost of points that you need to be a viable fantasy starter. Dawson Knox has scored a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. He's coming off a performance of 4 catches, 49 yards, a receiving touchdown, 12.9 half PPR fantasy points against the Washington football team. He is only rostered in 9% of leagues. And if, in fact, again, you are in need of another tight end option because Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, Jared Cook, they are not able to produce on a weekly basis, then maybe, in fact, this is a great option for you to go ahead, pick up, have on roster, and potentially start in great matchups going forward. Again, the Buffalo Bills, they take on the Houston Texans this upcoming week. We're looking to potentially start a lot of Bills this week in a very advantageous matchup. Either way, moving on to our number 4 and our final tight end, it is Pat Freiermuth. As of this current moment in time, a rookie tight end typically isn't the guy that you want to go after, but because we know the stat, there hasn't been a top 12 rookie tight end in terms of fantasy productivity since Evan Ingram, Rob Gronkowski in the early 2010s. We know these stats. And that's why, there's a little bit of hesitancy as to what exactly we're going to see for the rest of the season from Kyle Pitts. But the Steelers' offense is in trouble. Ben Roethlisberger does not look good. There's a reason why 19 targets went in the direction of Najee Harris. Him getting 14 receptions yesterday with, of course, Deontay Johnson out, with Juju Smith leaving early, with Eric Ebron being irrelevant, with the offensive line. We know Zach Banner is injured. He's on the injured reserve. His backup got injured. The center got injured. Their offense is in trouble. And, of course, if they're going to continue to throw the ball into the direction of some of these more favorited targets, which is Claypool, of course, Najee Harris, and Pat Freiermuth in the next coming weeks, then you could see a lot of productivity there. He had 3 receptions, 22 yards, and a receiving touchdown yesterday for 9.7 fantasy points, available in 92% of leagues on Yahoo. I think there's a potential in which he could end up being the number 1 tight end in this roster in the next couple weeks, and with, of course, Big Ben continuing to look in his direction, find a lot of upside. All right, we're going to move on. And speaking of Big Ben, but quarterbacks in specific, let's talk about quarterbacks that we trust, because we absolutely do not trust guys like Big Ben, and they shouldn't even be on your bench at this point. We should potentially look to swap out our bench quarterbacks, if you in fact do have one, with one of the following guys, because they have been balling out, and maybe even potentially start one of these guys. We begin with Derek Carr. We talked about him last week, and we're going to continue to do so. Only rostered in 53% of leagues. There's a lot of potential for Derek Carr to find more and more productivity. 3 consecutive weeks of 380 plus yards and 2 touchdowns. He's been absolutely on fire. Takes on the Los Angeles Chargers defense. I think he is ready and poised to continue his incredible performances. And, with the remaining quarterbacks that we're going to talk about, the number 3 seems to be a number that continuously pops up when I was doing my stat breakdown. So again, like I mentioned, 3 consecutive games of over 380 receiving yards and 2 passing touchdowns. That's great. And on top of it, the Raiders are 3-0. Now, when we move on to our next quarterback, they are also 3-0. Sam Darnold has led the Carolina Panthers to a 3-0 record. He has himself had 3 consecutive weeks of 2 or more total touchdowns scored. And without Christian McCaffrey in the lineup, him being able to run in touchdowns gives him more value in a 4-point per passing touchdown league, of course, with the ability to run. I think as of right now, playing against the Dallas Cowboys in week 4, Dallas Cowboys will be on a little bit of a shorter week than other teams. I think Sam Darnold is going to continue to throw the ball and find success, and that's another one of these options that is only rostered in 22% of Yahoo leagues that is available to you. Another player that the number 3 is very valuable in, because though they were not able to win against the Buffalo Bills this past week, he did end up scoring a good amount of points, had himself 3 total touchdowns this upcoming week. They take on the Atlanta Falcons, which in my opinion is a very advantageous matchup considering how bad that defense is played. Though Daniel Dimes did not look good against that defense, it mainly had to do with the fact that, that entire New York Giants offense continues to find themselves injured, and that is an unfortunate matter. But either way, I think Taylor Heinicke going forward, not a bad option with his upcoming schedule and the success he's already found within this offense. Of course, the Thursday night game against the Giants, and of course, this last game against the Buffalo Bills, and then what we're going to see against the Falcons this upcoming Sunday. And the last option I wanted to mention is another 3-0 quarterback that, as of this current moment in time, has been great. I mean, yes, this last week wasn't a great fantasy quarterback option, mainly because, of course, they didn't even have to compete against the Jets. The Jets pretty much took themselves out of this last game. They did not perform well. And of course, Zach Wilson, with the amount of turnovers he has had, it pretty much just led to Teddy Bridgewater and his offense just running the ball and running the clock out. I think that's not going to be the case going forward when they play against defenses like the Buffalo Bills or the Pittsburgh Steelers. It will require Teddy to use his arm and find himself, of course, a lot of success with the receivers that surround him, which, of course, I expect him to do, and that is why I mentioned him as our final quarterback option. Let's move on to the specialists, the kickers in the defense, beginning with the top kicker I wanted to mention. It is Brandon McManus. McManus takes on the Baltimore Ravens at home this upcoming week. In the last 3 weeks, McManus, 9 points, 13 points, 16 points in fantasy football. That is insane numbers, and it's only going to get better considering he goes home, and he's going to have himself pretty advantageous week. I know that the Baltimore Ravens defense was missing a couple players, but even if they are going to have their full rotation of guys back, it's not going to really make a difference because the kicking game for Brandon McManus is going to succeed regardless, considering this Denver Broncos offense isn't the greatest, and they're not going to score on every single drive as they don't have as many playmakers as some of these other teams and don't find as much success. But either way, Brandon McManus, a solid kicker option going forward. Now, the second kicker option I wanted to mention is Greg Joseph. The former Cleveland Browns kicker, now a Minnesota Viking, will take on his former team this upcoming week in the matchup. The last 3 contests, he has had himself 8, 13, and 13 fantasy points. I think Greg Joseph is continuing to find fantasy success, mainly because, this is a pretty high, powered offense. With Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, Kirk Cousins, and Justin Jefferson firing on all cylinders, they're going to score a lot. And their defense isn't the greatest, and they're going to give up points. They're going to continue to have to score. And of course, the kicker is going to be involved in that success. I think Greg Joseph, as of the last 3 weeks, has certainly proven that he is a great fantasy option. We move on to the defensive position, beginning with the first one I wanted to mention. It is the New Orleans Saints. The Saints this last week put in a quick number against Mac Jones. Mac Jones turned over the ball, threw a pick 6. All of that, of course, accumulated to over 20 fantasy points for this defense. This upcoming week, they take on the New York Giants. Danny Dimes, of course, will not probably have Darius Slayton and or Sterling Shepard. Probably will have a hobbled version of, Kenny Golladay, as we've seen all season long. The offensive line has not played well. It's going to be tough for Saquon. I think a defense like the New Orleans Saints, which is somehow, some way available in like half the leagues right now, should be automatically picked up against, of course, the New York Giants this week, but also Washington the following week. Some pretty good matchups on hand. The final defense I wanted to mention is the Tennessee Titans. And though you may be thinking, Andrew, why are we talking about the Tennessee Titans? Don't they have one of the worst defenses in the league? They might, but they play against the Jets. And Zach Wilson has looked awful, and the offensive line cannot protect him. And though there may be a potential for a Corey Davis revenge game here against the Tennessee Titans, I don't think there needs to be revenge exacted per se. But either way, I still think that the Tennessee Titans defense getting after this horrible Jets offense will lead to fantasy points galore. And that's why I suggest Tennessee this upcoming week as a potential pick up and play streaming defense in this given week. Either way, thank you everybody for watching. Those are my week 4 waiver wire targets for the 2021 fantasy football season. I appreciate you guys supporting the channel, coming out with your viewership. Tomorrow we'll talk about the running back position and my top 36 rankings, talking about matchups, all of that ahead. I do appreciate it. Enjoy tonight's game. Eagles versus the Dallas Cowboys should be a fun one between these two interdivisional matchup teams. I am predicting between these two teams, I expect the Cowboys to win this game, even though it is in Philly. The Philadelphia Eagles will put up a fight, but I expect the Dallas Cowboys to win. We'll see how my week record goes in terms of predicting teams. We'll see how it goes. Either way, thank you guys for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.